present than our councillors. I think that's encouraging in some respects. Happy New Year to my fellow councillors and to Lisa. Happy New Year to all of you as well. First item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence. Now, the only apology we've actually received was from Councillor Arnold. So whether either Councillor Davis or Councillor Fuller will make it, I don't know. Councillor Davis or Fuller is attempting to get it completed, but they may have fun because it's extremely flooded at Honington. The alternatives were worse, as I can testify from this evening. Do you accept the apologies of Councillor Arnold?
Yes.
Yes. The next item is a representation by town in respect of Miller's They've kindly come along for a second presentation to us. They've already been here once. Of course, what's slightly different this time is that the application itself is already on the agenda. So the plan is to keep the sort of representation element relatively short on the assumption that councillors have actually looked at the paperwork on the portal. But then I'll throw it open to councillors if they have any questions. Then we'll move through the formal bits of the agenda, and happily Miller's is the very first item of the applications we're going to look at anyway, so it's not like we have to change the agenda around to get it dealt with. So, without further ado, can I ask whoever's going to do the presentation to come on board?
Thank you. Well, we're going to, that's great. I'm just going to quickly introduce. Thank you for having us. We are familiar with the waterways, the roads between Peterborough and Anvil, having taken a few different routes to get here, but here we are. We're going to keep it very brief tonight. Thank you for having us along. We appreciate the chance to come and talk to you. Just quickly by way of introduction, Johnny Anstead, one of the planning directors of town, my colleague Richard Pender, who's development manager leading the project for us day to day, and Susie, who's from Mole Architects and leading our architectural approach. We also have some members of our building group, and it just leads me to say that one of the special things about the project is that we have members of the community who are going to end up living there here tonight and working with us in a collaborative way as we go through the design process. So it's quite an unusual project in that regard. It's not something that's where we're speculatively building housing for people that we don't know. We're very much working with the future residents to build housing that meets and suits their needs, as well as being mindful of members of the local community, I hope, and trying to make sure that we make the appropriate best kind of compromises and align the interests of future residents and existing residents to get the best results for Anvil as a whole. We have been here before, and so you know what the background and as to who we are. The big change from last time is also that the scheme is a much smaller scheme. One of the bits of feedback that you left us with last time was a concern about the scale of the scheme that we were proposing. I think it's hopefully reassuring that we're now in tune with, I think, the level of development that had been proposed originally through the neighbourhood plan, that although it isn't progressing as a plan, is the kind of the number of homes that was deemed to be suitable for the site at that time, 14 homes. It's now on a planning application. There's lots to work through, but that's in summary where we are. Richard's going to just take a few minutes just to talk through the schemes to where we are. Happy to take questions. Thank you for having us tonight.
Thanks. Yes, just to stress Johnny's point and Councillor Chappell's point, that it is submitted, the submission is, application is live. It went live in November 23. We have been asked to keep it brief. We intended to keep it brief. I hope everyone's familiar with the application, so I'll just sort of quite quickly rattle through. Just to sort of clarify what we're actually seeking permission for, so it's an outline submission for up to 14 low carbon homes on Millersfield, with all matters reserved save for the access, with 2 new access points to Bennefield Road, one in the west, one in the east, and closing the existing access to the allotments further east that has been a relatively hazardous point of access that will remain as a pedestrian point of access. And as part of the overall scheme of development, we'll be retaining and protecting in perpetuity the community allotments as a community asset. So as Johnny mentioned, through sort of a considerable amount of engagement with the local community, with yourselves, with our building group, like stakeholders, we have sort of refined the scheme down to this illustrative proposal. So 14 homes laid out with there's 2 housing types proposed. So the orange house type that you can see is what we call a bungalow plus, which is 2 stories to the front, single to the rear, which enables bedroom accommodation on the ground floor. So creating accommodation, recognising the local identified need for housing for the elderly, but hopefully a flexible housing typology that can also be a starter home, and 4 semi-detached, slightly larger 4-bed homes. You can see the access route through, which to the eastern side will be both access and egress for the allotments that will function as a one-way loop through the site. To the southern area, there's a nature reserve which will be publicly accessible from Benfield Road, looking to plant that up with further tree cover to assist with the screening of properties at Warren Bridge, and also increase the biodiversity on the site. Central area there is shared garden space. One of the themes of the development is to create a more sociable style of development, both through the process with the building group, but also by design. So I'm hoping that'll be an interactive space, and again, looking to maximise biodiversity, with parking generally trying to keep that to the periphery, so the central space isn't dominated by cars, and again creates a more sociable space. Hopefully I've covered everything there, but can return to questions. So
Sorry, do you want to take questions as you go along?
I can do.
Sorry, if you then go back.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand. You've got a yellow square that says community use. What is the community using? I'm not sure what it is.
So it's not actually fully developed at the moment. It's a space that we've identified. So town schemes to date, and a number of our forthcoming schemes have been co-housing schemes. So the building group process is about sort of trying to generate some of the qualities of co-housing, which is around more sociable living, a greater degree of community. And one of the ideas here is to perhaps create a communal space for the community to use. What exact form that takes is
So it's a space, not a building.
it could be ultimately either.
It's just not very clear from that at all.
No, it isn't. Spatially, there's an allowance at present, so it isn't.
It's a big question mark.
It would be resolved at reserve matters. One of the rationale for an outline approach is to enable the building group to actually participate in the detailed design.
Sure.
So
I just saw it there, and
Yeah.
I thought I don't quite understand it.
Can I just ask what the blue is around 2 sides of that square?
I believe that is cycle storage. Am I right, Susie? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's cycle storage to the west here and to the.
So that would limit what took place in the yellow square, wouldn't it? Strange. It seems strange to me.
I mean, potentially. The detailed configuration would come at
So
reserve
it's
matters.
just a bit of artistic license at present.
It's a spatial allowance, I would say.
Okay.
I mean, could I just say that potentially that could be a little workshop, or it could be
Yeah.
a tool shed, or it could be somewhere where there's communal things that people can share.
Yeah.
It's a space, isn't it?
It's a space, and I think
It would be, sorry, just, it isn't fully poetic license in it's an illustrative scheme. So in a sense, everything that isn't the detailed items of access that Richard described is for continuing conversation. But I would just say that the plan does work. This is the entrance,
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I
the
think,
access
I
would be on the
feel,
other side of the path.
I just wondered whether it in fact was an important water storage or something to do with.
As
Something to do
It is a question mark. It's an opportunity for the group, if they wish to have a shared facility, which could be a shared tool facility. Or a
That's
kitchen
not
or
the
something.
community, that's the residents, it's not,
It's not the
you need
community.
to kind of use your labelling a bit more accurately then.
Yeah, well, I think that that's again something that could be determined down the line as to how. I think that the premise would be that it would be owned and managed by the people who are part of the scheme. So you're
Sure.
right. So
It's
that's-
not their community at all, is it?
well, it could be made. It could be made available to the wider community.
I think,
I
no, I think you
suppose.
should just call it what it is, it's a resident space.
Okay, I think that's
Yeah,
that's
I
that's
agree
fair
with
as a
you,
starting
James.
point. I think. Yeah,
Um,
a potential resident
It's
space.
clearly very misleading, it's not for the community, it's for the residents. So can you go back again?
Yeah.
You've got this space below, which, public owned space, really nice part of what you're planning to do here. You said that they would gain access from Benningfield Road, I'm not quite, can you explain that? I'm not quite sure.
So the proposed access at present, at the moment, is vehicular access to the northeast for the allotment owners, which is substandard and not particularly safe. So it would be closed to vehicles, but there would be pedestrian access. So you can see sort of the white path to the northeast. So there's then a path down the east of the site to that.
That wiggly bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you'd go through the residence area?
Effectively,
So public right of way?
Yes,
Okay. Right.
That was part of the, in fact, it's part of the requirement that we have with the landowners that we maintain
No,
access
absolutely,
to
I'm
that.
just,
So,
I'm just curious as to how it would work, that's all.
yeah,
Okay.
again, that's one of the challenges that Richard hasn't mentioned is the topography of the site. So getting a route that works well down through to that nature area is something that takes
No,
a bit
that's
of
why I asked the
detail.
question,
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
lovely, it's a lovely space.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's very positive.
Yeah,
I'm wondering how people are actually going to
Yeah,
access
yeah.
it, that's all.
yeah. Well,
You clearly have the same thought.
exactly. We and I think that there is more. Again, this works, but it might well be that there are better ways of doing it ultimately, and that's the kind of conversation that we wish to continue to have. Because as you're sort of saying, there's not much. Well, you're not saying this, but you're inferring that there wouldn't be much point in a very good community space at the bottom of the site, a public space that people can't easily get to. So I think we would want to make sure that it's fit for purpose and achieves the best for the people who are going to be using it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Right, sorry for that.
No. So I'm trying to strike a balance here and both keeping it brief, but sort of answering questions and reassuring. And sort of just to go back to sort of getting into these detailed questions and sort of I suppose spatial allowance is appropriate, showing that a spatially 14 home scheme works on the site, but ultimately the application relates to the outline submission. So just to touch on the key benefits that we think arise from the scheme. So 14 new sustainable homes that we hope will create a real precedent in Oundle, a sort of exemplar sustainability. Oundle's first custom build community, sort of the where you define a community, but through the building group process, we're bringing about a new custom build approach. Hopefully helping to address the need in Oundle and further afield for housing appropriate for the aging population. Retention of the allotments I've mentioned. The scheme will be net zero carbon in operation. That is a requirement of our land agreement with the millers, who many people know, and low carbon construction. So town are looking to go beyond both the requirement of the land agreement and building regs and deliver truly low carbon development, delivering a biodiversity net gain and a broad sustainable drainage approach. We think the scheme helps to preserve views from Benfield Road, designed in such a way that there's permeability through the site, touched on the social nature of both the physical design and also the process delivering the development. a balance of both private and communal green amenity spaces. And finally, sort of the proposal to address the footway along Benfield Road to the north of Millersfield, which is currently could be improved upon. Just to progress quickly through some of the key views. So it was identified through the neighbourhood plan that the view southeast from Benfield Road across the allotments is a valued one. We believe the scheme preserves that well, maintaining a sense of openness through the site. These are the views along Benfield Road. So this is west. You can see sort of the top right image here of the existing tree line that will be retained, screens a considerable amount of the development, maintains the semi-rural nature of the site. The application includes wire lines, as you might see in a more formal landscape impact assessment, just to assist understanding the, again, illustrative scheme. Impact looking east is fairly similar. Existing tree lines, screens the development and maintains the nature of the existing views. And with the north-south access roads through the development, maintaining that permeability across the site, maintaining the semi-rural nature. And just to touch finally on the sustainability credentials. So to deliver that net zero carbon in operation, we'll be targeting Pascal certification for the homes, which is sort of the very best sort of practice standard, certification standard for low energy homes. Net zero carbon in operation I've mentioned, so maximising solar PV, integrating battery storage, energy efficiency, lighting and appliances wherever we can. Targeting LETI embodied carbon standards, if that will mean anything to anyone, but these are the industry best practice standards when it comes to the actual carbon in the construction. So low carbon construction materials, that means local and natural materials wherever possible. And designing for both durability, making sure the scheme stands the test of time, and also disassembly, can those buildings be taken apart at the end of their life and those materials reused? Water efficiency, so again, the land agreement requires us to target less than 80 litres per person per day, which is way below building regs. We will actually seek to potentially come in under that. The application it includes our outline proposal for the sustainable drainage systems, so ensuring that there are greenfield runoff rates for surface water, so there'll be no additional impact than the field as it presently stands, and delivering, as I mentioned, biodiversity net gain on the site. Were you going to?
Yeah, just to finish off really, just to explain what may happen over the coming months in terms of time frame. So as Richard mentioned, we submitted planning in November. We put out on the planning permission, obviously it's presumptuous to write it, but that's the earliest that it could happen, 3 months from submission. It might take longer, as you know, district, depends very much on workload, but this is at best. We're looking at planning decision in February. We would then embark on detailed design where we'll start to tackle some of the detailed questions. Will there be a yellow box? Will it be a box or will it be a space? Is there a need for it? What will the public access arrangements, if any, be like to that? Starting from the point that, as you say, it's a residence asset first and foremost. But we'd be exploring those kind of questions as to what does this look like in terms of its relationship with the wider community, and that's going to be quite an intensive period of work. We're estimating 3 to 4 months of workshops, working with the building group, continuing to have engagement with the local community through webinars and events, and hopefully working with you to table more ideas and to work with you in a way of your choosing to bring those thoughts forward. We then put in planning in summer of this year to get to reserved matters, so we could end up having a full detailed planning consent in the last quarter of this year, 2024. That would lead us to doing preparatory work to be on site from spring 2025 and a construction period of a year, say, to get to spring 2026. All of that is very provisional. It depends on lots of things clicking into place, but that's just really to kind of put that on your radar as a way that this might play out over time. So hopefully that is helpful. Happy to take any more questions that you might have.
Sorry, we ran over there. Integrated questions.
It's not a large development, but it is actually a significant development. Just to pick up on a couple of points, you said that the plan is to retain allotment space in perpetuity. How are you proposing that be done?
We're inviting the district to consider that with us through the Section 106. Mike, who's our head of planning, isn't here, but he's drafted the heads of terms, which are part of the planning application, and that invites that conversation. So our commitment is that those become permanent, dedicated, and no questions asked over the sort of permanence and status of those allotments. How it actually works in practice, and we also need to consult with the allotment society to work out what the best structure is for doing that. But the fact is that at the moment they're sort of temporary allotments that don't have that sort of permanent status, and we consider it to be a potential benefit to move it from being temporary into kind of bona fide permanent allotments. But the form of that is to be determined with the district.
Okay. In a sense, developing from that, the area that you described as the sort of nature space, the southern end of the site, running down to Lyvedon Brook, who's going to be responsible for maintaining that? Is that going to be part of the residents' association, in effect, with a management company and compulsory membership and all that?
Well, do you try lead off, or do you want to?
Well, I mean, again, it's up for consideration whether that is maintained by the residents or whether it's retained by town and town manage the long-term maintenances.
It's our responsibility at the moment. That's the black and white situation. Is that we as town, we will at that point own the site. We have obligations to the landowners that part of the agreement that we've had with bringing this site forward in the way that they wish it to happen, and they're very, very legacy minded. So they want to they've been quite careful with the legal agreements to make sure that we're not going to just sort of not do the things that they wish, which are basically around sustainability and public amenity. So we will have responsibility for maintaining that. And it might be that over the detailed design stage that we sit down with the building group and say, look, what would it look? What's a sensible management arrangement? Is it that you want us to kind of do it from afar, or would it be better to to give the future residents and indeed the wider community more of a stake in managing it? In which case, that's fine. We could look at that, but I wouldn't want to say that it's going to be like that, and as if it's not our responsibility. We start with having a commitment to making sure that we manage it, and then if there's a better way over time, then we will work that through.
I mean, it's important to realise that, I'm sure you know, management comes with costs.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why our chair asked the question that if the town ends up having to maintain it, then that's quite a significant chunk of our budget.
Yes, and I don't think that's what that wasn't in our sort of list of options in terms of the ones that we've considered at this point. And I've no idea what the town's appetite is as to be part of a menu of options, given what whether that's something that you've considered to be in your role, in which case we could have a conversation recognising what you said, Councillor, about the need for funding in order to do that, recognising that would need to be part of the conversation. But I think we're open to different ways of managing it. We know that we'll need to work through a sensible arrangement that means that it's not just left unmanaged.
I'll just on from that. Have you got examples of where you do manage similar kinds of spaces?
Well, so if you take our scheme at Marmalade Lane in Cambridge, which we talked to you about before, it's not a dissimilar arrangement in that we bought from the council in Cambridge the whole site. We then worked with the group that was going to live there, in that case a co-housing group, but building group and co-housing group, as Richard said, it's a bit of a fine line of difference. Through that process, we established a preferred management approach that the group had in mind, which was that they wanted to be able to take it on and manage it direct themselves. So then we, in that situation, work with them to work out what's the budget going to be. Does it make, is it possible to manage it within the service charge? Practical questions like, do you want to be doing it yourselves, or is that ever, are the residents going to be wanting to be hand-on, or do they want to be less hands-on? And all groups are different. The age profile, other kind of things all come into play at that point. So that's a process that we will have to go through. It's a conversation to be had. But if you look at the Marmalade Lane situation, that is a brilliantly managed bit of shared space that, admittedly, it's not public. So coming back to that differentiation between what's public and what belongs to the resident community, that needs to be looked at quite carefully. But it is very well managed. There's no bit of that arrangement that hasn't been, at the end, sort of dedicated to an appropriate end management solution. And in that case, it's a very hands-on, resident-led approach. That might not be the right approach here, but we will work it out.
So have you got examples that aren't like that go on being managed by you?
No, not that we've built, because Marmalade Lane is our first built scheme. So we could certainly look at different schemes that we've got in the pipeline, but that's, I don't think, what you're asking for.
Okay.
Really, just one last question, conscious of the time. You have no doubt been looking on the portal yourselves at the various observations from consultees and others, and one of them that struck me was NNC Education Libraries Digital Infrastructure et al., who seem to be asking for a bit of money under Section 106 agreements for early years provision for secondary education and contribution towards libraries, which, adding it up, looks at well over £100,000 between them. I wondered whether you wanted to make any comment about that aspect of it at this stage or not.
We've made provision, obviously, for Section 106 as a package. And I think if Mike were here, our head of planning, he would say that the usual approach here is that now we wait for those requests to land, and then overall we sit down with the council and with the district and work out what the appropriate mix of spending is. I think in terms of, so I wouldn't want to kind of say anything specific about one, because it may be, at prejudice of another, and there will be plenty of requests that come in with any planning application. But I guess the key point is that we've made sensible allowance in our workings for Section 106 payments. We'd probably be looking at, as with all these things, you kind of also look at the impact that you're having that requires a Section 106 payment. And I only raise that because we will have quite an older demographic in terms of our resident group. So I wouldn't expect education impacts to be the highest, compared with other schemes. But and that's the kind of conversation that we have, which isn't to say anything very specific about the request that you referred to. It's just to say that kind of thing would be part of what we consider in sitting down with the district council to work out what's appropriate.
Pretty much the reply I anticipated.
Yeah.
Having said that, this really will be the last question. I've heard what you just said about your potential age demographic.
Mm.
I remember rightly from your original presentation, this isn't going to be one of those schemes which is kind of age limited to those over 55 or whatever else. And certainly in terms of that particular entry on the portal, they were going on about the likelihood of an impact in terms of early years, although they go on to say that they weren't sure how they could assess it for various reasons currently. So there's a bit of a tension there between your view of what this development is going to look like, and have to be informed by the present composition of your building group, and the possibility that in fact it could be filled with families with very young children initially, making it very much a starter home.
Yeah, well, we don't want to put a restriction on it because it sort of, it feels like, you know, we're trying to create something that's quite natural and will allow different people to live there over time. So you're absolutely right. We would be loath to put a restriction saying it's only over 55s. So you're right. It's a question of nuance. There's a real, it's realistic for them to say, well, you don't know who's going to be living here in 10 years' time. Maybe it will be old, maybe it will be young people than the initial cohort. And so we that's why I don't think we'd be too black and white about dismissing any particular request in that way. It would just be a case of sitting down and looking at the overall budget and saying, you know, let's apportion it most appropriately. But yeah, I wouldn't want to say that we would be looking to avoid all contributions to education because we've got an old demographic, because that's not what we're not, you know, as you say, we're not fixed to that demographic. It's an unrestricted scheme. So I think it's a question of balance, and that's the balance that we'd be drawing out through a conversation with the district.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that presentation and for taking so many questions. But I think we'll probably have to draw that to a halt at this point.
Yeah.
There's a couple of housekeeping things we have to do next, and then we'll move on to actually looking at the application themselves.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'm sure you're going to want to stay on for the discussion, which of course you're welcome to do. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is any declarations of interest. Firstly, any disclosable pecuniary interests, anybody? Or any other interests?
I should declare that I live close to the, in the conservation area, close to Minnesfield. I don't know whether that's relevant, but I do live relatively close to it.
I suppose as to whether it is a disclosable pecuniary interest depends on whether or not the impact of the development is likely to be prejudicial to the value of your property. You're probably best placed to take a view on that. However, I'm conscious of the fact that if you declare a disclosable pecuniary interest, you shouldn't then take part in any discussion.
No, I don't, who knows? It may well have an impact on the value of my house
That's not any development.
in either direction.
I'll take it as another interest.
Okay.
Right, minutes of the meeting that took place on the 5th of December have been circulated. Present are Councillor Arnold, absent tonight, myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Davies also absent tonight, and Councillor Fuller, who's also unfortunately absent. That suggests that there were two of us who were present at that meeting. I'll propose those minutes. Are you happy for them to second them? Well, I hope so, otherwise we're never going to get past this item. Right, on that basis. Yes, we have just signed here and copies. Right, which brings us onto the planning applications themselves, and as traded, the very first application is the outline application for Minnesfield. The first thing I suppose to say about it is an outline application. There's a loose sight of the fact it is not a detailed application. The only non-reserved aspect of it is the plan for two methods of access stroke egress onto Benedict Road, so in effect an in and an out, and in fact maintaining the current access but as a pedestrian access only to service the allotment. So that's the only thing that, if you like, may be fixed if this outline application is then granted permission on the basis of how it's been submitted. Everything else, in essence, is up for grabs. What you've heard is quite right. In the neighbourhood plan that we developed and submitted for examination by the inspector, this site was one of those that we allocated for development, And it's also right to say that we had envisaged it being a relatively small number of properties. We had envisaged that the allotments would be retained either in their existing place or in another place but within the site. We had, I think, seen the plans, the very sort of early stage plans, which included what's now described as the sort of nature reserve element of the southern end of the site up against the brook. And so, to some degree, our predecessors, and I would stress that, had deemed the site suitable for residential development. It doesn't necessarily mean to say that we are bound by that. I think we need to have it in the back of our minds that we viewed it as a site that was suitable for development. What, of course, is also fair to say is that that was in a very different context. At that stage, we were identifying various sites around the town against a background whereby our own research within the town indicated that the preference was for a larger number of smaller sites than a small number of large sites. Of course, what we've ended up with in the local plan part 2, about which more at the end of the meeting. But what we ended up with in the local plan part 2 is 3 sites being allocated for residential development in the town. The Cotterstock Road, St Peter's Road site, which in the end we didn't much like. The, what I'm going to call St Christopher's Drive site, and the site to the rear of Stoke Newell Road and Cemetery. It's fair to say that of those, 2 have got planning permission, one of which is already in the course of, I might do relatively slow development, but development nevertheless. And the Christopher's Drive site has permission, and the Stoke Newell Road site has already, I think, come before us on possibly 4 occasions. Doubtless there's going to be a 5th, and indeed I know that when we look at an item later on our agenda, the proposed developers have come back to us with some more information. It's also perhaps interesting to note in that context that although we had identified that as a suitable site for development at the time of the neighbourhood plan, when it came to the applications that we've considered, every single time for various reasons, we've actually objected to the development proposed for that site. One of the issues that has troubled us, I suppose, in the context of development in the town is the issue of infrastructure. The impact on infrastructure of any particular development and the capacity, if you like, of the town to absorb further development. Of itself, this is probably the smallest large-scale development, if that isn't a contradiction in terms, that we've come across for some time. For example, the site that we looked at the other week off Herne Road for the McCarthy Stone development, which is 42 units of a particular type. And obviously the developments on St Christopher's Drive and on St Peter's Road are both 130, configured in one way or t'other. And the site on Stoke Newell Road is, I'm going to call it between 50 and 60 for various reasons. But obviously all of those significantly larger developments than what is being proposed here by way of outline for just 14 dwellings. So that's the background. I ploughed my way through all of the paperwork on the portal as I need to do, and provided everybody with a report about that, voting, for example, on the design and access statement. So, And I've also looked at what is on the portal in terms of comments. I actually meant to do this last week because I prepared this before Christmas and totally forgot. Suddenly woke up with this shock over the weekend and thought, I haven't actually reviewed the comments. So I went back and looked, and in fact there were one or two more on this particular slide. And I think it's fair to say that the comments are perhaps, as you might anticipate, mixed. There are those who clearly see this as not only, as it were, a good scheme of its type, but also a good scheme full stop. And then there are those who have voiced concerns. They include loss of privacy for residents of Warren Bridge due to the slopey nature of the site, which has actually been referred to in slightly different context. The height of this site relative to Warren Bridge. Concerns over surface water flooding, concerns about light pollution, issues raised about the adequacy of on-site parking, what I might term various ecological concerns. I'm not going to go into starting talking about Great Crested Newts or anything else for that matter. And then we've got the statutory consultees, which, as at the other day, emergency highways, which the way I read it sounded as if they were, as it were, in principle unhappy because the access to the site comes off Benfield Road, the A427. Education, libraries, etc., which I've mentioned, which came up with all sorts of requests for Section 106 money, which I spelled out. NNC Environmental Protection didn't have objections, but made some observations and sought a construction management plan, which I have absolutely no doubt would be part of any planning commission in any event, but no surprises in terms of what they were looking for. Anglian Water have drawn attention to assets within the site, which would have to be taken into account in its development, and the Environment Agency didn't have any comments at all. So, the issue for us, and it's a pity there are only three of us, but it is a quorum, so we are entitled to proceed, is do we support the application? Do we not seek to make any comments adverse to the application? Do we actually object to the application? In the latter instance, why? And I think the easiest thing is that only three of us around the table is to actually look at each of you individually. So, Councillor Cheshire, in terms of thoughts on this.
Well, immediate thoughts are that I personally like small developments. So I would feel better about this one than some of the others that you've mentioned. And I've asked questions about it, so I don't really have a lot more to say at this point, which I'm afraid isn't
No,
much.
that's fair enough, you know. Councillor Shurey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, there's a lot to like about this proposal. The density, the size is one thing. The design features that are being incorporated. Passive house, I'm a big fan of passive house. I think it will not quite be a first passive house development in Arnold. There are, I think, a couple of buildings that are passive house, but all of that is to be congratulated. I like the integration of a public space, although again, how one maintains that and gains access to it needs to be thought through clearly. I guess one concern I do have, and I know our friends here will say, oh, we thought of that and it's all taken care of. Tonight, if you drive to Warren Bridge, well, you can't. It's flooded. The road is impassable. And I don't see this in any way helping with that. I think if anything, it's going to exacerbate it. And I do seriously worry about pushing a problem further down. You know, that we have an existing problem with flooding at Warren Bridge. Literally just go there tonight, you can't drive a car through it. You can't realistically even walk through it. And I do worry. You know, the water's got to go somewhere, and I know the design people will come and say, well, we've got all these clever plans that's going to sort this out, but I have a nagging doubt, that's all.
I would agree with there. I mean, it's been something that we've always had a problem with and
Yeah.
never managed to change in any real way.
Well, it's a real problem. I mean, it's not a hypothetical problem.
No, it's a
You
real
literally
problem.
go there
It's a
tonight,
real
you can't
problem.
drive across it.
Yes, and obviously it's a problem that has been drawn to the attention of the council by residents of Warren Bridge on, I have to say, numerous occasions over the years. And indeed, one knows that residents there have their concerns
Yeah,
about this development, and indeed the other development I referred to, off Stephill Road, for the same reason. It's equally perhaps fair to say that none of us are technical experts in this area. And I simply don't know whether, even if somebody presented an extremely detailed scheme to us today, I would be able to say, yes, that is or isn't the answer. In a sense, we will have to rely upon NC to get that aspect of it right. But we can obviously draw their attention in making submissions on the application to our concerns about the possible impact on what I might call the Warren Bridge area of what is proposed for here. And that I think would be perfectly fair. I think picking up on what my fellow councillors have said, I too actually am impressed by much of the scheme. We've always regarded it as essential that if this site was developed, we didn't lose the allotments, and we don't. We liked the idea that it was first mooted of a kind of publicly open access at the end of the site nearest to the Lyveden Brook, which of course may or may not have some flooding issues, which is one reason why you wouldn't necessarily want to do anything else with it. And we did very much value the idea of ensuring that however it was done, it was possible to look from Benfield Road, as you can now, down towards the Warren Bridge area. And because of the height difference, you look down into the fields and across the roadway and into the fields on the far side, if you like. And it seems to me that this development ticks all of those boxes and is likely to tick other boxes in terms of its, what I might call, green nature. I asked about how we ensure that the allotments are indeed preserved in perpetuity, and I know, or at least, no, once I know, so I am confident that the Millers very much do view those allotments as being integral to the scheme and would want them to be there in perpetuity. So it's probably only a question of how is that best achieved and how is that area best managed. It may not be necessary at this stage, therefore, to take a specific view about that. I know that at one time, for example, we wondered whether that area of the site where the allotments were might be transferred to the town council and be managed by the town council in an arrangement that I suppose not be unlike the arrangement we're likely to come to as regards Fletton Field and the Fletton Field Association, something similar where you've got in fact the existing management of the allotments it's pointless reinventing the wheel because they make the thing work anyway. I'm not saying we should, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I mean, that is an option, as I suppose is the area described as the nature reserve ending up as owned by the council rather than by either the site owners or say a residence management company or what have you. Again, I don't think we need tonight to start getting into hard and fast about those matters, other than perhaps to flag up that we regard their inclusion as integral to any support we may express for the site. What is interesting is that nobody has said anything about infrastructure other than the impact on drainage and so on. And I raised issues around early years provision and all sorts of things. And I know that we've expressed concern, for example, on behalf of the Health Centre just across the road from us here, because we know that their attitude is this town can't stand any more development because we haven't got the capacity. And I know that when we looked at the McCarthy Stone development, we made the not unreasonable observation that if you are going to have a development that is indeed, as it were, dedicated to those over a certain age, it is likely that those over a certain age may in fact place greater demands upon primary healthcare services than those of tenderer years, if I can put it delicately. But I think we probably all view the scale of this as perhaps enabling us to take a view around that. So I think in terms of reaching a decision, the easiest thing is simply to ask my fellow councillors to now nail their colours to the mast if they feel able to, and either say that they supported, objected, or have no comments other than those in the sense that we flagged up already in the discussion. So I started with you last time, so I'll start with Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, I mean, I've said what I have to say. I mean, I think there is a concern potentially over where water goes, given what we've seen today at Warren Bridge. You'll note, and you already mentioned it, it talks about the issues that have been raised about highway objections. So I go along with what's already on paper.
Yeah, perhaps I should say that in terms of the highway thing, I was actually quite happy with the idea of an access and egress onto Benfield Road. I remember that when McCarthy...
You don't live there.
It's true, I don't. But I remember, for example, when McCarthy Stone were trying to get planning permission for the old Abbott House site on Blackthorn Road, they proposed a single access and egress. And we got very agitated about that and said that, frankly, it needed an access and an egress. This development at least postulates that that is going to happen. Okay, there may be an argument between the developer and the
practical problem is that because of the fact that the houses on the north side of Benfield Road have no parking, essentially they park along the road, which essentially turns that bit into essentially almost a one-way bit of road. I mean, access will be an issue. I think that's why they're objecting to it.
We can certainly make reference to that because it is a fair point. I mean, it's also fair, I did point it out in the paper, but not actually refer to it tonight. But in terms of its setting, with which I'm sure we're all familiar, on that side of the road, a number of those properties are within the conservation area, although the site is not, and a number of those properties are actually listed to boot. I haven't seen a comment from the conservation officer at the time that I wrote up my paper. I don't know what view he may take. But I think it is perhaps fair to flag that issue.
The other thing, sorry to go on, that's not been mentioned, and I don't see where it sits here, is that there is, of course, an Exhall bus stop on both sides of the street. Right in the middle of that, where that plan is. And I have no idea with all the
About here.
construction vehicles, what's going to happen with the bus stop and everything else.
To move, it's a good point, but they,
And I think that's what NCC are concerned about. It's not just,
Yes, I mean, I suppose it would be on the wit of man potentially to move permanently the bus stop, so to make temporary arrangements during the construction phase. But I think again,
all of these things have to be sorted out.
it's a fair point to flag.
Yeah. That's all I'm doing.
So I think
in broad terms, I'm in favour of it.
Yeah. I get the
But I just
distinct
need
impression
a
we're
tiny little
probably,
bit for any hitches that might come
I
from.
think probably the answer is this, that in principle, we probably are in favour of it and therefore are not objecting.
Yes, I said
But we
that
are going to flag
there's
a
several
number
things
of
that I think-
concerns that we want addressing as part of certainly of any ultimate determination. And it's not just a question of signposting at this stage than saying that they are grounds to object to the application for our land permission. Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
I think I know who's going to end up writing this submission to NNC.
Yeah, as I said right from the start, as the development goes, there's many things to like about this.
Yeah.
And I wish that all the developers were as sympathetic as you, but we still have to get it right.
Which I think is a very fair point. So, no objection, but with various things flagged, which I'll write up in due course.
Tweaks.
And we'll move on. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that if we are going to move on, it may very well be that there's going to be a mass exodus of the public, in which case it may be sensible to marginally suspend the meeting that will continue to broadcast until you've all left. Otherwise, it's going to get very noisy.
We've got a list of things to take away and think about.
I'm sure you've listened
We have.
very attentively to
And,
what's been said.
yeah, that's really helpful and constructive, so thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
See you later. Yeah. Yes. All the best.
They said it's doing stuff.
Safe journeys home. and everybody comes home.
It's the timing.
Stamford tonight, not usually, but my parents are in Stamford, so subject to various not usually.
And you,
Well done, thank you, Ben.
Can I ask that people talk outside rather than stay inside?
You might be able to go home.
Yeah.
We've still got 5 more to do yet. Though I doubt whether it's going to be long.
Well, how do you get that for?
Yeah. We've got to let
You were saying that?
Thank you.
Let's all
See you again. Bye-bye.
Right. We'll resume. And the next application is 86 West Street. Where curiously, the application is for listed building consent. There doesn't actually seem to be an application for planning commission accompanying it, which is odd, because sometimes you get it the other way around, when somebody forgets to do the listed building, but here they seem to not actually put the other one in. So we'll simply deal with the application that's in front of us. So that is for LBC for the property. It's within the conservation area. It's grade 2 listed, part of the group. And I've given some details on my sheet about the listing. And this is what used to be the novel shop.
Yes.
For years and years it was the novel shop.
It's Jeff Stubbs.
It was Jeff Stubbs. That helps you identify what we're talking about. And there is a business called Little Balloon that used to operate from the marketplace. And the owners of that business are the people who are applying for permission on the basis that they're going to kind of live over the shop, literally, and operate their business from the premises below. And there we have a nice little drawing about it. Now, may almost help. This one is, so these are the existing, aren't they? Or are these? Actually,
difficult to see, isn't it?
No,
Can't
no,
see it
that's
well.
not the existing, that's
That's
new. Can we just go to the existing one?
elevation
So,
existing.
elevations existing.
Uh,
So,
yeah,
there is Jeff Stubbs, there is the frontage with which we're familiar. Pairs of windows there and there. We can see to the back, some of the pairs of windows to the side, and then we've got a sort of section plan there. If we now contrast that with that, obvious change, this is all renovated. It's now all going to be done, surprisingly enough, in blue, bearing in mind the name of the business, with gold lettering. We've still got the windows, etc. It does seem to be pretty much in the nature of a refurbishment when you look at it from the front. If you just skip back to the previous one again, just so that we can look at that. So here we've got the south elevation. If you just concentrate, as it were, on the back there, and then look at the new one. And here we've got this iron structure with a sort of glazed roofing over the back. But otherwise, pretty much as is, with some heritage lights let into the roofing. I wrote quite a long piece about it because there was actually quite a lot of material to look at in terms of things like heritage impact and so on. And I took it floor by floor by floor. We looked at what they were planning for the cellar, we looked at the frontage of the shop, we looked at the kitchen area, we looked at the first floor, and I looked at the second floor and so on. And indeed looked at the roof. Interestingly enough, Historic England referred to their guidance with regard to the proposed works, saying that they really didn't have any comments to make other than referring to their usual guidance on Collar West roofing. And NC Archaeology stated, I thought it was an interesting choice of words, that the minimal character of the proposed refurbishment would not affect the building in terms of its heritage significance. Although actually there's quite a lot of works envisaged. It did look to me that the plan was to do this, the right word would be sympathetically. There's also a certain element of suck it and see it, as much as they're kind of saying, as we uncover things, it may become necessary to do X, Y, or Z, which in a sense is fair enough. I was looking through it and started thinking along the lines of, A, as would be usual for us, we'd be saying things like, where possible, existing fabrics should be maintained and repaired and restored rather than simply completely replaced. But to some degree, we probably want to be guided by the conservation officer as to that, as indeed probably to everything else. But it did strike me that the description of it as being renovation and repairs was for once a pretty accurate way of describing what they had in mind. The building has sat there empty for some considerable time and looks rather sad for itself as a result. This should substantially improve, I suspect, the appearance of the building from the front, which is where people are by and large going to see it. And of course, it's fair to say that the heritage windows, which are proposed to be inserted into the roof to the rear, aren't going to be visible from West Street itself. So, thoughts?
I don't know if you want to go first, Sam, or? No? My thoughts are positive. As you've already mentioned, the current property is in, shall we say, a very bad shape. And what is being proposed here, I think, is nothing but an improvement. And I think I understand very much their reticence a little bit because, and I have actually had a conversation about this with the vendor when it was on the market, that there is a danger that until they actually start the work, they won't actually quite establish what will need to be done. But I think from what they proposed, it seems very sympathetic. I think it will actually be nothing but a positive addition to the area, having a functioning shop there, as opposed to what is a crumbling shop there. So I'm very much in favour of it.
I'm in favour of it, and I think if we put conditions or that became restrictions,
Yeah.
that would be very sad, because there might be things that they would do much better if they could go ahead and do them. As long as the building people keep a good eye on it.
And they're not really, and I know they're putting this kind of porch thing, I'm not quite sure what you call it, this
Yes,
cover at the
but it's
back.
sort of canopies.
But beyond that, they're not expanding the footprint at all.
No, that was my feeling.
Which again, I think is very positive. I'm very much in favour of it. And particularly when you look at what's there currently, it's clearly got to be an improvement.
Right. In the sense the responses given don't surprise me at all. So I think it is maybe one of those applications where we can actually say that we support the principle. Because we like the idea of this property being renovated and repaired. And our only anxiety will be to ensure that nothing is lost that ought not to be lost. And that therefore we do want the conservation officers view, and we would want them very much to be working with the conservation officer during the course of works, so that if issues are uncovered, they can have discussions with the conservation officer at an early stage about, right, this is what we found, what do we do about it for the best, to ensure that that property is
I think their approach,
preserved for the next couple of years.
their approach, I think, is very positive, and it's good that it will still be a retail outlet,
Yes, it's brilliant.
which I think is good for the town.
Absolutely. Yep. So broad support. The next one, there is stunningly little information available on the portal because it's a tree application. However, usually you get a little bit more than you get here. It's a location plan, there's an aerial photograph. Great. Other than that, no information about why they're proposing to fell. We just have to sort of sit there and guess, it sounds like. The application has been made because that property lies within the conservation area. I am sure that if it was anything other than a group of conifers, we might very well have been expressing some concern about the idea of tree felling in the conservation area, with no reasons being advanced at all as to why permission to do it is being sought.
Can you show us exactly what bit we're talking about? I can't necessarily on the aerial shot. I'm trying to work out.
It's quite tricky to see even on that.
But that's it. Well, it's there, is it?
There.
I think that we're talking about this area here where they put G1, so I think it's the group that's here. The only rationale I can think of is that it makes the site itself, as it were, bigger and possibly lighter. But that's just pure speculation.
So where's Melbourne Road in relation to that? I'm getting
That's quite different.
Oxford,
Of course. it is.
Oxfam's
That's why-
down
There's
here,
the common
common
room
room.
Yeah, no,
That's the
I've got it
lanterns.
now.
So
Milton Road.
Of course,
all the way
I-
down this private road, and you
Yeah,
can
I
see
know
the
exactly where it is.
site there.
Yeah, no, I know where it is now.
We have had situations not too long ago where there was a lot of pressure on us to allow trees to be cut down in order for building to take place. What is special about these that they don't matter? Does that make sense? Because we really fought hard on other occasions.
I understand what you're saying, and I suppose in part it is because of the fact that they are conifers. And therefore perhaps one feels slightly less protective of them. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. Than one might have done if we were talking about.
Well, that's what it sounds like.
Well, that's fair. That was
Not
my.
being accusatory, but
No,
I
that
see
was
what
my
you're saying.
view, that they are probably, if you like, less worth preserving because they are conifers than if they were something else.
Trees are
It
trees.
does, but
Trees are
as you
trees,
say,
yeah.
trees are trees, and I know that conversations I've had at home about my wife, because we have quite a number of trees in our garden. And she occasionally thinks that we should be doing some things to some of them, and my view is no, I like trees, and I think it's nice to have them. I mean, we could simply say that, given that no reason is advanced, unless the tree officer himself had no objection, then we would object, because no reason is
Yes, that
given
would be
for the
my
facility.
suggestion.
You summed up my feeling, and that is, we've not given, to me, there's no reason for taking them down to ground level that's been offered.
Yeah.
And until I've been given a reason, I don't know
Yeah,
whether
we
that's
have-
valid or not.
We've really fought
Yeah,
hard
yeah.
in recent years about that.
So that's what I would do, David.
Yeah, well, I think we'd probably, again, pretty much as one over that one. Which moves us swiftly on to 76 South Road, reducing some trees in height. I was a bit confused about how you can reduce in height from 20 feet to 6 feet with a crown lift to 12 feet high.
I can understand that sort.
I read it, I reread it again, and I thought, I'm never going to understand quite what I mean by that, because it sounded to me as if it was incompatible. But that aside, again, the reason the application is in is because 76 South Road lies within the conservation area. The reasons are given to reduce the height of the beech tree, quotes, to maintain a compact, small, manageable tree suitable for the size of the garden, and the acacia is to stop it interfering with, as it puts here, neighbouring traffic.
Yeah.
But really, again, there's an application, there's a homemade drawing, which with all due respect to the sort of person who submitted it,
Yeah.
is only marginally better than useless. In my view, it really doesn't help greatly. Yeah, I'm not going to say more than I just said, but it really isn't the most helpful application. But there we are. It does seem to form tree husbandry rather than anything
It's
else.
the house on the corner, isn't it?
Sorry, which one? Let me just have a look. I've lost, what was the address? 76 South Road. There isn't a location
Well,
plan.
it's on a kind of, it's on a
That
corner,
looks cornery.
it's South Road and.
Yeah,
South
I
Road.
think it's the first one that isn't very long ago since we were considering
Right.
tree work there.
If we have, I must admit, I haven't picked up on the fact that we've apparently looked at it before.
I don't think
It was strange actually, driving home before I got distracted by the flooding. I was musing to myself that I have this folder of all the reports I've done for the last goodness knows how long.
Right,
And that it might be very helpful to index them by property, so that I could look at a property and say, have we looked at anything? When did we look at it? Where can I find the information? Kind of thing. So, let's see. Where 76 is on there. No.
No, I think it's the other way.
This way, is it?
Carry on. It's isn't it up there somewhere. No, not that far.
Well, that's 80.
That's 80, yeah. It's down, it's on that corner there.
Is it that one?
Yeah, I think it's that one.
That would seem likely. 'cause
And I
that's
think the
80.
trees are in that bit to the left of, yeah, there, exactly where your pen is, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I haven't, I must admit, since the application came in, been down there to take a look at it. But that, there you go. That's probably right. Well, as I
There it is,
say, it's tree husbandry, reasons have been advanced, although what is proposed does sound largely confusing.
It's this one
We
here.
might wanna make a
That's
reference
76,
to it.
is it?
Yeah, this one is here.
Right, so,
Where's the drawing then? No, wrong
No,
drawing.
that's the previous one.
Where's the drawing?
There's the drawing, which, as I say, I didn't find particularly informative.
So it's one this side and one that side of the house then, isn't it?
do you think we, again, could ask for just slightly more information or?
Well, I think, I remember over many years, former councillor Oakes would tear his hair out when we got to tree applications because of the paucity of information that one gets for tree applications. And I think that it may be worth our while contacting the planning authority and saying, look, could you not insist
Yeah.
that applications
yeah,
have
should-
photographs of the trees, a proper location plan, and always give reasons for what is being applied for, rather than ending up having to guess at reasons and all the rest of it.
I agree.
Anyway, that's perhaps an observation as a general point, rather than on the specifics of this
The-
application.
The tree officer that came to give a talk to us, he's gone. He's been gone quite some time, and this lady that's the case officer for these two is a brand new lady. So I'm not making excuses for them because they've always been fairly poor with the information, but I can email
But it
her and
might
say we
be
need.
worth, if she's relatively new, but I didn't
Telling her
know
what we
what's the
need.
name, and say, look, could an NC adopt a new practice around these applications so that it becomes more possible for authorities such as this one to actually see on the portal that which you need to see to make any kind of meaningful comment. But in terms of this one, I'd be inclined to say something along the lines of, it appears to amount to tree husbandry, although the precise nature of the works does seem to be slightly difficult to ascertain from this. But that, absent any concern expressed by the tree officer, we have no objection, or something along those lines. So that seemed to be possible response. Complete silence.
I think that must mean they agree.
Any view?
it's much like the previous one that you, isn't it?
I mean, I think it's
You need to have a,
I think it's slightly different because it's not removal, it is, on the face of it, tree husbandry.
Yes.
So they are likely to be less exercised than our normal policy is not to object unless there seems to be a very good reason to do so. And I think the only reason here might be the lack of clarity around it.
yeah,
Therefore, if the tree officer has another problem, we wouldn't have one. That seems.
talking about, as it were, these sort of trees, there's a lot of difference between those sort of things that people buy and put in thinking they're only going to grow about this high on their rockery.
Yes, and those which anybody with
The
any
ones that
degree of
near
common
me are the
sense.
very big, very huge, very, very old pine trees that we really should concern.
Well, obviously, there's an issue around trees that, if you like, predate the property by possibly some considerable
Yeah.
margin, because then you kind of come to the nuisance, if I can put it that way.
So I don't know.
But I think in terms of this one, realistically, that's
Yeah,
perhaps the
yeah,
only
fine,
response
yeah,
we can make.
yeah.
The next couple of applications are slightly odd. In as much as, you go to the portal and you put in that code and nothing comes up. The only way you can find out any information is to go to NNC pavement licenses and start Googling. That produced a response in relation to Brew Babu, but bizarrely did not produce anything in relation to bees. Now, there might be an explanation for that, because I then looked into the whole thing around applications for pavement licenses, and councillors may remember it, that you probably didn't get
I
it.
remember it very well indeed.
What I was about to say is I actually sent out a little paper about applications for pavement licenses the other day, having researched it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I noticed was you actually only get 7 days to comment, which seems bizarre, because it must be perfectly obvious to NNC that there is no prospect of any town or parish council being able to comment on any of them unless there is the most remarkable fluke which enables it to be considered at a meeting and a response got back in time. And I wondered whether what had happened is that the beans thing had gone on, been through its 7 days, and in effect got taken off, hence the fact you couldn't find anything. Whereas the Brew Babu one had gone on at the time I wrote this up,
And may well be.
and on the face of it, the response was due by the 29th of December. In other words, it had gone up on the 22nd. So we may be out of time anyway.
Precisely.
But what struck me is Brew Babu currently do have an outside area. We're all familiar with it. We all see people sat there. It seems to be pretty well used. And my own impression is that it doesn't create any particular issues or
They both
nuisances.
have outdoor.
Yeah,
Well, that's what I was
I'm
then
not
wondering.
sure why it doesn't just say
No.
renewal, because these come through
They
regularly
both currently
whenever.
have
But I was
outdoor.
trying to think about Brew Babu. in
The
terms
ends
of
is
it
actually
being out.
larger than Bruce.
Well, yes, exactly, because
Well, I hope
There
we
isn't
can
an
get
awful lot
there
of-
and the people from the county up
yes.
for a meeting. I mean, we did
I remember going into the whole Brew Babu thing
Yeah.
before. But, sorry, not Brew Babu, no, the whole beans
You
thing
mean
before,
beans?
yeah. The Brew Babu thing, I must admit, although I've frequented Brew Babu on a number of occasions, I didn't recall, when I was looking at this, there being any outside area. And I thought to myself, well, where on earth would you put one? There isn't very much
They definitely
space.
had both, well, but having frequented both of them, Beans is primarily going up, it's kind of opposite the War Memorial,
Yes.
going up New Street. And again, it's very heavily used, particularly because it gets the morning sun. Brew Babu's is much smaller and it's just immediately
about one
outside their
table
shop.
or two
It's
tables.
basically one table and two
Four
chairs.
people.
What you can see.
Yes.
So Brew Babu's goes where that sandwich board thing is.
Yeah.
They put a table and two chairs out there. In a sense, I just kind of, I don't know whether we're just wasting our time, because I think this is just simply a renewal of what they've already
And
got
we
in place.
want them anyway, don't we? So-
Well, you could well be right, but my only concern would be,
There it
I
is.
wasn't aware.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
okay.
Have we had any complaints from members of the public about the presence of these things obstructing the pavements?
No,
No,
Because
No,
it seems to me, if we haven't had those issues, and if these are in the nature of renewals, then we may have no comment to make.
I think we should see it as an asset rather than anything else.
And indeed, it may or may not be too late to comment anyway. But I think it's a general principle. Again, we ought to be going to NNC and saying, your system is ridiculous. A, you can't find anything about it on the portal, you have to go around the houses to find anything. And B, having a system which gives 7 days for consultation is simply inadequate. Supposing that another business, let's say, the Greedy Piglet.
Well, Piglet, yeah.
They've got them.
They've got them anyway.
They've got them.
That's another idea. I'm trying to think of one where.
So is the coffee
there isn't-
tavern, they've all got it, haven't they?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one where there isn't anything. I don't think there is actually.
I think they've all got them.
All right, well, suppose, I'm getting myself
Well,
the right tangle with my example. But supposing then that Little Blue, instead of being the business it is, was going to open it up as a tea shop at that end of town, and there was a precedent because the Cricks used to have a tea shop a little further up, unless opposite the Catholic Church, and they wanted to put things out on the pavement there. So it's not a renewal, it's completely brand new. We would want time to be able to put this on our agenda and proper time for the public to make responses to the council and to ourselves, and proper time for us to consider it. And under their current setup, that just isn't on the face of it possible.
So the issue is with the process, not
Yes.
the.
I think in this instance, my beef is with the process itself, which is, I think, something we could follow up as a committee.
I'm just reading the letter, David, sorry to interrupt. One of them, the Brubaboo one, says, should you wish to comment on the application, please email the licensing team by, full stop. The deadline for your notification, this is the Beans one, to us for approval or refusal of this application is, full stop.
Well, that just emphasises my point.
So there's nothing on there.
If you receive a communication which tells you there's a deadline but actually leaves you to guess what it is, that's about as useless as a chocolate pie guard. And they really need to sharpen up on this. So I suggest we make no comment on either of the specific applications on our agenda. If you
Yeah.
raise a general point.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Let's see what, if anything, comes of
Wait 12
making
months
that
for
point.
a different relative.
Well, yes.
They don't-
Which brings us to the last application on our agenda, because the one about 37 West Street is basically for information, and I've written nothing up about it. But this is Beaumont House. Beaumont House, for those who aren't aware of it, is a very, very large house opposite Prince William School, the very last property, if you like, on Herne Road.
It's kind of hard behind that almost.
Yeah, I know it well.
But it used to be occupied by some friends of mine, where they built it. They've since moved away. And the current owners have put in this application. I got as far as reading Beaumont House, single story extension to the side, and nearly had a fit, because it must be just about the largest house in Oundle. But then I read on, to sign a detached garage and removal of external staircase from southwest elevation of existing garage and installation of a new spiral external staircase to its northeast elevation and alterations to the existing front balcony. And I got slightly less worried. There's the house, so you can see its location. It is literally the last house as you go out. You can't actually go out of Oundle other than by on foot, but it is the last house there. That's what was Cherry Grange. If you can find the existing, so over here we see the garage block. It's a triple garage block there. It has a sort of flat above it, completely detached from the main building, which is over here. And it has this little balcony here. Here you can see a wall. So that's what it is at present. And there is the exit, just at the bottom, there's the external staircase, so we're talking about which is on this end of the building. And if you go to the plan proposed, what we now see is that remains as is, except the balcony is extended full length. We still have the 3 garages. We now have the external stairway, spiral stairway at that end, and here we have 2 more garages, a sort of carport area, but under a, what do I call, a proper roof. The explanation for it appears to be that it's not possible to get the owner's cars into the existing garages. I was absolutely fascinated to try and work out what the cars might be. I got the impression that we were either talking about classic cars or supercars, or possibly both. But whatever it was, they need a bigger garage.
Can you leave that up? Sorry, I just wanted to go and check something, because I was confused by this as well. Because
They put that up, yeah.
that,
Did they put the cars on the garage?
I can't see,
I don't remember them seeing.
I can't see that it's actually
Any
any
different?
different.
No.
Oh, it's what, there's kind of,
Yeah, I think they must have done.
I mean, it's only, what, a foot longer here? That's the only difference. I don't kind of get it.
Yes,
I don't buy the argument.
I don't know
Well-
the argument either.
the argument ran, it's not big enough for my cars, and I need to put 2 of them in a garage, and I need to put the other one under a proper carport.
Yeah,
So I need
But the
to.
new space is no bigger than the existing
I
space.
hear what you're saying, Councillor Schuler. I'm merely saying what they're saying. They go on to say this, that the relevant NMC parking standards provide that a double garage should be 5.8 metres wide per garage and 6 metres long and 2.4 metres high. But they suggest that these garages are only 2.58 metres, so less than half that in width, and 5.3 metres long. Now, I don't know whether that is or isn't right, but that's what they say. And you look at that plan and you start saying, well, do the new garages look twice as big as the old garages? Or more? And I have to say, I'm not sure that they do. Though it's not entirely, you know, you could kind of try and scale it up, but whether they are or they're not, I don't frankly know. Having said that, the question, from a planning point of view, forget whether they are or they're not necessary for the moment for the reasons given. But is there a problem with the structure itself? And you can see from that they are marginally longer. It doesn't appear that way from if you like, the elevation, but from that plan, they do look marginally longer, and they may or may not, frankly, be that bit wider.
Could we just see the front elevation, please, Lisa?
So there's the new front elevation.
And the only thing I would worry about is whether the houses which are behind the garage have an objection effectively to the new roof line going over
Yeah.
the.
All I can say is that when I looked at it the other day, and literally at the weekend, there were no
Still
other
no comments.
No,
Still
well,
no
they
comments.
haven't, they haven't objected.
But I think it's a point.
I think they weren't to realise it had to have.
Well,
We look, because we
When you
don't
get
have to
the-
look, but
they should have been given notice.
They would have
Yeah,
been
they will
noticed.
be.
They would have been
So
sent
one
a
would
notice.
assume that if they wanted to
They're
object.
supposed to send
Is there a
all the way
proof?
round, yeah.
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 The thing that struck me about it, apart from, like Councillor Schuler, is this really necessary, etc. But leave that aside, in terms of the building and in terms of its impact, the answer is, subject to one observation I'm going to make, don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. It's a
I know.
big property, a big plot, there's plenty of space to do that. and I don't think it has any adverse impact on anything. The only thing that struck me was this. Currently, in order to access the flat above the garage block, you go up a stairway here. Now, you go up a stairway there.
And there's very
The
little
observation
space.
is this: what's the other side of the road? The school.
Yeah.
Now, the school itself hasn't clearly objected either to any overlooking issues that may or may not exist as a result of that. But it strikes me that if you get to the top of here and you're looking out, you would be able to look out over the, because there's a jolly big wall at the front as well, but you'd be able to see over the top of that wall and straight across the road and into the school area. Pretty no more than that. Of course, at that front end, it's traffic movements, it's car parking, etc. It's nothing, it's not like you're looking over a playing field.
But can they not see that through the window on what is the north side anyway?
Yeah, I don't think
Possibly.
that would.
Can we go to the current elevations, side elevations again? So which is the current one?
This one,
Right.
that's what it's like at the side at the minute.
There is,
So currently, there's a door,
yeah, that's on the south
and
side.
that's on the south side. If you look
Yeah.
at this,
No windows
which
there.
appears to be the
On
north
the north,
side, there is nothing. So going up here does now create the possibility of overlooking, but it's not overlooking a residential property. And I can't believe that there would be any significant issue in anybody sitting at the top of there, even with a pair of binoculars, looking at the kids below, even if they were that way inclined to do so. It just doesn't strike me that there is any real issue about it. So I was minded to say no objection.
Yeah, I am too. I'm not entirely sure I buy the argument, and if the people in the neighbouring house haven't objected, then
Yeah.
I think it's a no objection
Strange
from
to
us.
me,
Um,
I think they're not thinking of living in it, you think, making their garages into living space.
Well, I did wonder whether in due course an application would come to extend the living accommodation over the front garage block, as it were, back over this one. But to be honest, even if you did, again, other than a possible impact on Jeremy Grange, the other side of the wall, the next property along, would it actually make any difference? It's as I say, it's a big property, big frontal area. I mean, if you go to that house, you drive down, you come in off Herne Road, you drive down the drive, and in effect, you can go around in a circle, circle around outside the house, come out the same way you were facing, because it's that big, a huge turning area.
No, it's not Cherry Grange that will be affected, it's the property that was the, I think they called it the old stables.
The old coach, the old
Right
coach
on the
house,
road.
yeah.
Oh,
I've
right.
been in their garden though, and there's no overlooking issues from the
Right,
back of that.
Right. Okay, I quoted the wrong property, but I think we got that.
Jeremy Grange is the next one over,
Yes,
isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah.
much further back.
Yeah.
No, you're right. My mistake. Anyway, it makes no odds. It doesn't appear to be an issue either way. So, we're into the last lap, folks. I'm pleased to hear. Planning outcomes, they're set out. We didn't object to 9 Warren Avenue, more of which in a minute. In relation to the retrospective planning application for the pergola, etc., which we didn't like, it's been refused. I don't know whether, Lisa, there's any follow-up on what the local authority are now doing, given that this structure was erected without permission. A retrospective application's been refused. Are they taking steps to make them take it
I
down?
presume, I don't know what their process is, but
Can we follow up on that?
Yeah.
And refer to the fact that it's been refused and say, right, well, what are you going to do about getting it removed and the property reinstated as it was. And the others were no objections and granted. The 9 Lime Avenue situation is interesting. Insofar as an application for a porch, and we looked at it and we didn't object. And I was slightly surprised to read later that in fact NNC had refused the application on the basis that they regarded the whole structure as being excessively big. And the owners are now putting an appeal. The reality is that you don't normally need to, as it were, resubmit your comments. Supposing we'd objected, we wouldn't need to repeat our objection because they'd be taken into account by the inspector in determining the appeal in the first place. Well, here we're one step back from that. We didn't object in the first instance. I can't believe we're going to object to it on appeal, having not objected to it
It's just
initially.
paperwork.
So it's just a question really of awaiting the outcome of the appeal.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. That brings us on to the penultimate item on the agenda, which is to receive correspondence regarding the flood risk assessment for residential development at Stoke Dora Road, discuss and decide any further steps. Councillors will recall we got a presentation on behalf of the proposed developers of the Stoke Dora Road site at our recent meeting. I can't remember whether it was the last one or before, but anyway, a recent meeting. I have to say that I thought that it was a considerably less effective presentation, shall I say, than the one we enjoyed earlier this evening. Nevertheless, issues were raised around flooding, and to give the gentleman his due, after having gone away, they've come back with more information around the flood risk assessment, and there indeed is the document which I think has been circulated to everybody.
Indeed.
It strikes me that the situation is this. We've already commented upon all of the applications that we've had in front of us thus far, or perhaps I should say the application we've had in front of us in these various iterations so far. And there is nothing outstanding in that sense. If the developer comes back with yet another iteration, we'll be asked to pass comment again, and maybe at that point, if we want to raise issues in relation to that, that's the point at which we could do so. Otherwise, this is really more simply for information. We can assume, tell local residents that we sought this information, and that's what we've had. As I said earlier in a different context, I'm not a technical expert on the drainage.
It's not really worth the paper it's written on. You know, they basically ask somebody to give the outcome that they want.
You may well be right. I mean, as I say, I'm not a technical expert. I look at that, I took it at, well, I wouldn't say it at face value. I looked at it, I saw what it was, and it strikes me, well, this is a matter between the developer on the one hand and the local authority and the local flood agency and so on the other. And frankly, they'll have to sort it out between themselves around it. We've already flagged up our concerns around the possible exacerbation, as I think it was put earlier, of the problems that emanate from the Lyveden Brook and its impact on Warren Bridge, and our concerns around whether this development will simply exacerbate an existing problem or ameliorate that problem, and I'm not technically capable of saying which it is. There are people in this town I know who have contacted us and who have contacted the developer and who have contacted NNZ and been pretty sceptical stroke scathing about what's been proposed thus far. But there it is anyway. I think it's not really, I know it says discuss and decide any further steps. My recommendation is that actually we don't take any further steps, we just await further developments in relation to the application, has anybody's got any better idea? Leave it at that.
I don't have a better idea.
You don't have a better idea. Do you have a better idea than leaving it for the time being? Right. That being so, the only other item left is any other relevant matters for report only. I will have one briefly, but Councillor Shearer,
I don't know.
suggest. Councillors will note that Councillor Jones is no longer with us because Councillor Jones has very sadly decided to step back from the council. Which means, of course, that we've lost him from this committee. We've also therefore lost the deputy chair of this committee.
True.
I suggest therefore that on our next agenda we put on the issue of whether to replace the deputy chair for the balance, as it were, of the current year, through to May or not. I know that for a considerable period of time we effectively operated without a formal deputy, but then we decided that in Councillor Jones we had somebody who we had confidence in that he could do the job and step into the breach and all the rest of it. But as he's not here now, we're going back at square one. It also, of course, means that we're one councillor down in terms of our numbers. And here we are tonight, and there are three of us here.
It's getting all thin ice a bit in terms of.
3 out of 6, it's only 50%. I think as far as I can recollect, I think there's only been a couple of times in recent years where we haven't been for it, and I've ended up as chair, in fact, making comments on behalf of the council under my delegated powers. Clearly, we can ask full council to consider whether any other councillor should be appointed to this committee to replace Councillor Jones. It also, of course, begs the question, we are now 2 councillors down. We should have 14, we've actually now got 12. Of course, if we did take on 2 new councillors, with luck, one at least of them would join this committee.
Yeah.
But there we are. I think all we do is put that on the agenda for now. And Lisa, could you ask Emma to put on the agenda the full council?
Yeah.
The possible appointment of somebody else to the planning committee formally. Whether anybody would want to do it is another matter. But
You fancy it?
if we don't, we're not on the council yet. You've got to pick 2 members. However, you'd be very welcome. That being so, absolutely, Lisa, are you having anything
Yeah,
else
no,
for
nothing to
us?
say.
Well, rather late, 20 past 9, or thereabouts, I'll call the meeting closed. Thank you for your